Yeah. Hi, this is Sophie Gracefield. I'm going to be your presenter for the next hour and a half. I was just wondering if you could hear me, if you could just type your name into the text box, that would be great. Just check we've got everyone. Marina, I'm not seeing anyone come up. Are you getting those? No, I can't see responses. Okay. Oh, no, they're coming through now. Okay. Yeah. Okay, we might just wait a couple of minutes just in case we have any late people attending. So what I might do is throw open to the audience and just ask someone out there what they're most hoping to get out of today. So I'm just going to pick a name from the list, and the first one on my list is Elizabeth Burks. So I'm just going to unmute you, Elizabeth, and it'd be really great to hear what you're most hoping to get out the next hour and a half. Yeah. So, sorry, we're just sorting out the technology. So Elizabeth, it'd be great just while we're waiting for other people to join us, what you're most hoping to get out of the next hour and a half, if you're willing to share. I wonder if you can hear me. Thank you. So Marina, are you happy for me to start? Yeah, we'll get going. So thank you all very much for joining. I know you're a little bit later than us, so it's your evening time. But I'm going to be talking to you for the next hour and a half about the thinking environment. What I'd like to do first of all, hold on one second. Marina, I now can't move my screen. There it is. Yeah, it's working. Okay. So what I'd like to do first of all is introduce myself and then explain a little bit about the thinking environment, which is the work I specialise in. I've put a little picture of myself up, not because I'm vain, just because I think using technology sometimes we become little voices on the end of a computer, but that's me. I currently live in Sheffield in England, but I spent the last 11 years living in Australia, so I still have a bit of an Aussie twang at times. So what we're going to do for the next hour and a half, I've split it into three main sections, each of which will last for about 20 minutes, because everything I know about webinars is that after about 10 minutes you start losing attention, and it gets harder and harder to concentrate. So there's going to be three distinct areas. The first one is I'm going to talk about these two worlds of thinking. So we're going to talk about the spectrum of independence in coaching and what I would call exchange thinking and fully independent thinking. So I'll be talking about those. I'm then going to go into detail on a number of the components or the underlying behaviours around the work I do. And given the time, we'll see there's 10 of them. I've chosen 4 which I think would be most relevant to you as coaches, but if there is time I'll go through more of them. I'm then going to give you my sort of three top tips that I think you would be able to use straight away in your coaching. But what I'd really like for you to do as I'm talking is really think about, so what does this mean for you? So how could you apply it to your work? How can you apply it in your coaching? How can you use it straight away so that it's most relevant? So if there's things that I say that you think, yeah, that makes perfect sense, try and make a note of it or grab something about that and then use it straight away. Because again, all the learning shows that if we don't do something different within the next 24 hours, you won't do it at all. So either teach someone else or try and apply it. So what I'll do after each of those 20 minutes is I'll unmute or I'll see if anyone wants to ask any questions. And if there's none, I'll just roll into the next sort of section. but otherwise we can have sort of a discussion or we can answer questions. And for that, if you wanted to ask a question, either write it as I go and we'll capture it then, or when we unmute, if you can just make yourself known. Okay, so I will start this. So as I said, my sort of expertise is in applying this thing that we call the thinking environment to leaders and organizations and individuals. And I focus on training coaches and business leaders predominantly in how to use this approach in their daily practice. And by that I mean their work and their life and their relationships, because it sort of underpins all of those. So firstly, I thought I'd explain to you a little bit about the provenance of the thinking environment, what it is, and what it, I suppose, isn't. The work has been sort of in development for about 30 years. There's a lady called Nancy Klein who is a psychologist and counsellor and teacher by background. And she has been absolutely driven by a question around how do you get people to think really, really well for themselves. Because what we find is in our schools, in our workplaces, what we actually get rewarded for and what we get approval for is thinking like other people. So we pass exams by memorizing facts. We get promotions by being a little bit like our boss or saying things that are required. But actually what the world needs is people to be fully themselves and to be able to really think through things themselves. So the work all stems from one observation and one question that comes off the back of that. And they're both incredibly simple, sort of to grasp and to say. However, the implications of them are fundamentally important and can change how we then coach and support other people and how we, I guess, treat ourselves when we're trying to think well. And the observation which I've put on screen is that the quality of everything that we do, so the quality of everything that we do depends on the quality of the thinking that we do first. So if we want to have fantastic lives and we want to do meaningful work and we want to have fantastic relationships, in order for us to do that, we need to think well about the decisions we're making, the choices we're making. And we can only get good outcomes if we're doing good quality thinking first. And I know myself, you know, when I'm making big decisions in life, so whether that's moving country, having a child, changing jobs, moving house, how much actual real thinking do we get on our own of a high quality to be able to do that? And I guess the more I've observed this is, the more I find that when I think I'm thinking, actually I might be having a discussion with somebody or I'll have a conversation and people will share their experiences, which is fabulous, but equally often what I need to do, or what I most need to do, is think through this for myself first. And so from that observation came, I guess, the question or the implication is that if that's true, so if the quality of everything that we do depends on the quality of our thinking, how do we acquire that ability to help other people think well for themselves and for us to be able to think well for ourselves? How do we do this? And what we've observed is that the single most important factor in whether people can think well for themselves is how they're being treated by the people that they're with when they're trying to think. So the quality of people's thinking isn't dependent on their, you know, perceived IQ or how clever they are or how educated they are. It's actually about how well they're being treated by other people. A lot of the neuroscience, a lot of the latest research out there at the moment is also really supporting this. We're incredibly social creatures driven by relationships, and what we need when we're trying to think is to know that we've been seen and to know that we're not in danger, and to know that we're valued and that we're valued as ourselves. And I guess as a group of people who use this thinking environment, what we've observed is there are 10 replicable behaviours that we can teach and learn and use, which will reliably enable other people to think independently of a really, really high quality. And they're the ones on the screen at the moment. As I said, I'll go through a few of these in detail, the ones I think are most relevant to you as coaches, and I can provide sort of written information on more of them. But there are these 10 behaviours or 10 ways of being that so far seem to have the most powerful impact in being able to ignite the thinking in other people. We call these the 10 components of the thinking environment. We would love there to be 11 or 9 or 8 or 13. 10's a little bit biblical. It's kind of like the 10 commandments. It isn't like that at all. It just happens to be 10. But as a group of professionals, we're constantly sort of looking at whether there are more or whether we're missing things. But these are the 10 as they stand at the moment. So the question then becomes, how do I understand these well enough? How do I bring them into my practice and into my life and into my work? And that's what I'm going to be talking you through sort of in the second component of this webinar. What I want to do now, and I suppose just to contextualize this, is talk you through what I would call the spectrum of independence in coaching. So on your screen you've got a big grey box with an arrow underneath it. And if you can imagine sort of in your own coaching practice, often we sit somewhere on this spectrum of independence. So on the right-hand side, this is where we've got our clients doing their own fully independent thinking. So you're providing a time and a space and attention where somebody can really, really think for themselves. On the other end is what I would call almost sort of destructive interventionist coaching, which is where actually I'm going to sort of give you my ideas and my input regardless of the consequence of that. And very few coaches sit at that destructive end. But if you think about some of the organisations you might be working with, often inadvertently our leaders and our managers can be providing coaching or support which is more at that end of the spectrum. So they're not actually really valuing the other person and all of the expertise they bring. What they're saying is, please think like me and act like me, and I'm going to give you my opinion regardless. But I want to talk through these sort of two worlds of thinking, just to provide a little bit of context around the thinking environment and I guess why I believe it's such a powerful way of being in coaching. So the idea is that there's these two worlds, and I'm not sort of saying that there's literally two worlds, there's two earths. It's kind of a metaphor. The first of these we would call exchange thinking. So exchange thinking is big, it's popular, it's very well recognized in our cultures, it's rewarded, and it's the current standard of thinking in most of the interactions we have. So it's kind of that, it's characterized by input. So you're with somebody else, they're thinking or doing or saying something, and you're responding to that, either with ideas, suggestions, comments, commentary. So exchange thinking is characterized by input. And this is the world that from the moment we're born that we are socialized how to live in. It's also the world in which most of our formal professional accreditation takes place. So if you think about schools or work, a lot of what is recognized, even in coaching qualifications, what gets recognized is your ability to exchange your expertise with somebody else. So again, characterized by input. It's also characterized by the exchange of ideas, feelings, information. What we also find in exchange thinking is it's generally what's known, it's generally what's the thinking is established, it's complete. I'm already done with my thinking, so it's very solid. I feel certain when I'm in exchange thinking. I feel very confident providing my view or my thoughts because I've already done my thinking on it. And in this world, two people, to some extent or other, go back and forwards in the exchange. So depending on the nature of it, it might be called conversation or debate, it might be therapy, it might be advising, it could be coaching, it could be consultation. A lot of brainstorming takes place sort of in exchange thinking. This world often includes information, it includes interruption. We will often be tailgating, and by tailgating I mean I'm waiting sort of to get my go at speaking, so I'm not really listening, I'm just waiting. There's often a lot of rush, there's distraction, and what I'm doing in my listening when I'm in this sort of world of exchange thinking is I'm listening to reply. So my focus is again on my thinking and what I'm going to say. I also might be wanting to interrupt to get clarification or to get confirmation or to get more information. This world can, on an internal level, feel quite rushed. There's generally adrenaline sort of going through your system to some level or other. And this world can be incredibly exciting. It can be, you know, passionate and creative and wonderful. It can also be incredibly dull and damaging and infantilizing. So it can be that I'm being made to feel that I'm not understood and I'm acting like a child. And this pretty much is the world that at the moment we sort of live in. And the main characteristics are input and talking. So that's sort of what exchange thinking looks like. Now this world, and the reason I've given it as a sort of a spectrum is it's not sort of a solid thing. It changes and it moves on a spectrum of independence that moves, I guess, from sort of a minus level of thinking to a plus side. The minus end, which is sort of where that destructive arrow is, it virtually destroys independent thinking. So it's not wanted, it's not required. I'm kind of in that tell mode. And it's not generally a great interaction at that end. But that's not to say that all exchange thinking is there. There's a lot of really good stuff that happens when you're exchanging ideas. And that's where the sort of moving more towards that sort of, I guess, what most coaches, the world most coaches live in, is more of that plus end. So that does touch on the world of fully independent thinking. And here people sort of engage in an exchange of ideas. There is a real sort of awareness about equality, appropriate turn-taking, high-level listening skills. There would generally be a much higher level of attention being paid to non-verbal signals and to what's, I guess, the emotion and the feeling of words that are happening. There might be a contract around interruption. There might not be. And what you'd find at this end of the spectrum is there will be some or all of those components will be present. And when I talk you through them, I think you will recognize some of them. And at this plus end, there is still an exchange, but it is recognizable as supporting really good high quality thinking. And I think this is where coaches can have an amazing impact with people, because I think what people come to us for as coaches is to do their own thinking and for that to be recognized and rewarded. And what I'm hoping to do in here is show you, I guess, where the thinking environment sits in there and how you can, with a little bit of knowledge, can really help someone move more and more towards that end of the spectrum. The other world, let me see if I can show here. So that's kind of showing where we're at the moment. The exchange thinking is quite big, and there's not a huge amount of skill out there at the moment about sort of fully independent thinking. So I'm going to talk now about what I mean by that, what I mean by fully independent thinking. And this world at the moment is really quite small. It's not very well known. The level of skill and experience and practice of it is really quite low in the world. We're not taught how to do this. And this world, rather than being characterized by input, is characterized by attention. It's characterized by attention, by non-interruption, and by the absolute knowledge and expectation that there are discrete, well-bounded and equal terms taken to do our thinking. So knowing that we're not going to be interrupted, knowing that our thinking is what is required, allows us to relax. It allows us neurologically to be at ease with our thinking, and we know absolutely that we won't be stopped wherever we go, and whatever we say and whatever we verbalize, our thinking is what's important. We know that we're going to be invited to think for ourselves, and we know that that is the point and the purpose and the outcome that is wanted, our thinking. So I know I'm not going to have to exchange. And in that knowing, that's what frees me up to think for myself. So in this world, one person's thinking is activated by your, as a coach or as a listener, by your profound interest in where that person is going to go next, not in what you can add or what you can provide. So the focus is on the person thinking entirely for themselves, and in them then removing as many blocks as possible as they want to think for themselves. So this world is often new, it's unfinished, it's unknown. We don't often know, where we're going to go or what's going to come up for us. We don't know what nerves it's going to touch. It's certainly not linear, so it's not straightforward. We can start thinking about something, and all of a sudden we're thinking about something completely different. So within this world there is a lot of uncertainty. And as a coach, being able to sit with that uncertainty and being able to be comfortable with it is the skill, or is one of the skills you need to develop. So the thinking partnership or the thinking environment is one way that we can replicably and reliably create the conditions for fully independent thinking to happen. We're not saying it's the only way. We're not saying it's the best way. We're just saying it's one way, and we know it works, and we know we can repeat it time and time again with lots and lots of different peoples across cultures. So it works, but we're not saying it's the only way. And what the thinking environment is, it's the behaviours, and it's also a sequence of questions that we ask people which elicits this kind of really strong independent thinking. And what's absolutely crucial here is that there is absolutely never an input without invitation. So we never interrupt, and we never provide information or input without invitation, because to do that when somebody is trying to think for themselves derails to some extent our own thinking. And by derail, what I mean is, say I'm thinking for myself, and all of a sudden I get some input or some information, and all of a sudden I'm going to start thinking about that information that's been provided. So I might just go slightly off where I was going to go myself, and that might or might not be good or bad. That might or might not be good or bad, but it is a derailment to the independent thinking of the other person. I've just had a little note given to me saying that we're going to have a 5-minute break because apparently there's a problem with the technology. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to finish this section, which is about 2 more minutes, and then I'll pause then if that's okay. So from I guess our perspective as coaches or leaders or working with people that are in these roles, at the moment most of the coaching that takes place somewhere in that spectrum on the exchange thinking side. So it moves along this spectrum of independence. And what we're trying to do is not diminish exchange thinking, but what we want to do is increase the skill and increase the knowledge of the fully independent thinking. So how can they sit? So even when we are inputting and providing information, how can we do that in a way that doesn't stop the other person thinking for themselves? Oh no, we don't need a break. So that's kind of, I suppose, the context for what I'm going to talk about. So the thinking environment sits totally at that end of trying to encourage fully independent thinking and trying to sort of upskill people in how we can do that. So I guess my questions for you are, in terms of a reflection, in your coaching or in your work at the moment, where do you feel most comfortable coaching? So where, with certain clients, are you more directive, or do you allow them to be more independent? So, and you don't have to answer this now, it's more for reflection, but where do you currently sit? And then if you were being coached, how would you most like to be coached? So where would you like your coach to sit? Is it in that sort of exchange, or is it in more of that sort of fully independent thinking? So what I'd like to do is breathe, first of all, but I'd like to open the floor in case there's any, I guess, questions or observations on that. So I'm going to unmute you, and I've been asked to just check that when you do that, you've just got to make sure that your mic is on. No, your mic is... your mic is muted if you're not going to talk, so we don't get lots of background noises. So if you did have a question and you wanted to type it through, or an observation, that would be great. And we'll just briefly unmute everyone in case there was a question that I can answer at this stage. Okay. So did we have any questions on that sort of the two worlds of thinking? Okay, I'm going to take that as a no and carry on. Okay, that's fine. Right. So we might mute everyone again. Yep. Right. Am I muted? Can you hear me still? Yeah. Okay, so what I'm going to talk you through now is a couple of these components. So there's 10 of them in total. I can happily talk about all of them, but I'm just going to see how much time we've got. And what I've done is put the four at the front, which I think are probably most relevant to you as coaches. The thing I wanted to say before I start this is any one of these components on their own will help you move somebody towards that sort of fully independent thinking. Okay, so any one of them will really sort of improve your interactions with people. But what we find is when all 10 interact, it's transformational. So the thinking that people can do is absolutely astonishing. I've been doing this now for 5 years, and I'm constantly amazed at where people go in their thinking in a thinking environment session, and how very, very infrequently it would be anywhere where I would think that they would go. So again, if I'm sort of saying something and you think, yep, that sounds right for me, or that means something to me, focus on that. So I'm obviously going to give you a lot of information today, but try and pick out one or two things that you really think, yeah, I'm going to try that, or I can see that that would be relevant for me in my coaching straight away. So the first one of these is attention. And again, each of these words are in common use, but they have a very specific meaning within the thinking environment. So the definition of attention is listening with palpable respect and without interruption. So there's two components to that. So listening with palpable respect is one, and the second one is without interruption. And I'll talk you through what I mean by both of those. So the attention from one person can have a profound impact on the thinking of somebody else. And the difference here is, in a thinking environment, we are not listening to provide an answer. What we're trying to do is ignite the thinking of somebody else. So we're not listening to reply, we're listening to ignite. And because we are fascinated in what the other person is doing, that allows us to provide this level of generative attention. The other part of that is about not interrupting. Interruption is such an interesting concept when you analyse it. If I could speak to each of you individually and we talked about why we interrupt during conversations, there's so many reasons. We interrupt because we're excited. We interrupt to show that we care. Some people interrupt because they haven't got very good self-awareness, or they don't care about what the other person's saying, or they think that they're more important. I know I interrupt people generally because I get so engaged in what they're saying and I'm so excited, and I guess I just want to show that. I come from a family of terrible interrupters. I don't think I finished a sentence until I was about 21 when I left home, and that was seen as a sign of, you know, family love, the fact we could all finish each other's sentences. The thing with interrupting is it stops somebody else thinking for themselves. So it doesn't matter if you know what the other person's going to say. It doesn't matter if you've got better words or you could say it quicker. What matters for the other person is that they know that they're not going to be interrupted. So it's not to say that in my general life I don't interrupt people, I do. But when I'm in a coaching session or when I'm specifically trying to support somebody else to do their own thinking, I absolutely would never, ever interrupt them. They know that and I know that, because them knowing they're not going to be interrupted allows them to really relax and to be at ease and to go wherever they want to go. And it's the knowing that is really, really important. Because in our normal lives, if you do have somebody in your life that doesn't interrupt you, you're kind of lucky. But it's not that often. Whereas when you're trying to get someone to think for themselves, they need to know that. And again, this ties in with how our brains work. So if we think we're going to be interrupted, we'll shorten what we say, we will shorten what we think, and we will try and start getting approval. And again, we don't want approval when we're trying to think for ourselves. We just want to be able to think for ourselves regardless of what other people think about that. And I often think about sort of attention or listening in sort of different levels. So when you're with clients, or, you know, you will, I guess, or I know I find I sit somewhere in one of these. The first one is where I'm kind of pretending to listen. So I'm sort of in the room, but actually I'm thinking about, you know, what I'm going to have for dinner, how I'm going to get home. You know, so I'm actually sort of thinking about something completely different. That's level one listening, or what I would call level one listening. And again, very infrequently would you see that in a coaching environment. But this is where a lot of people live, you know, level one listening. The second one is where you're much more engaged in the conversation. So you've definitely got much better eye contact, or however you demonstrate that you're listening, sort of within your culture. In England and in most, I think, Western cultures, we maintain eye contact. So at level two, you'd see a lot more sort of eye contact, and you really are listening to the content of what somebody's saying. But often what's happening in your own head is that you're thinking about what you think about what's being said. So how can you respond? How does that make you feel? What do you think? Have you got your next question? What do you think would be a good, you know, intervention here? So again, we're listening, but the focus is it's sort of in our own heads. The third level is where you're fully engaged with the other person. And again, as coaches, this is probably where you spend a lot of time. You're focused on the feeling, the emotion, the underlying things that are going on for somebody else. You're really wanting them to explore things. But again, here we're still probably thinking about, well, how can I help? How can I support them? So there's still sort of a little voice in your head about how do I show my expertise. And attention, I feel, is sort of one step removed even from that level of listening. So all of your energy is going into providing attention to the other person. So yeah, of course you're listening, but you're doing it in such a way that the whole focus is on them and on what they need. So we've completely suspended that little voice in our head. And that kind of attention comes from a genuine interest in where the person's going to go next. So we need to suspend our desire to interrupt, to offer advice, to provide information, and to really allow that person to think for themselves. So as a coach, we need to be more interested and passionate about what is real and true for the other person than we are in our desire to do something or look like we're doing something. And what I find amazing is I've done so much training and so many courses on, you know, presentation skills and even listening skills. But it's really, you know, this level of attention is so powerful and so hard to master that for me, I think it's something I'll learn my whole life because you are providing all of your energy for somebody else. And people can genuinely feel it. They can feel when you're interested. We pick up so much on the non-verbal cues we're getting from other people, and what they're seeing when they look at you is this quality of respect and interest and focus on them as an individual. So that's kind of attention. There's lots of bits to it, but I guess if you go back to it's about listening with respect, with palpable respect, and not ever interrupting. And again, as I said, this is something I work on all the time in general life, but when I'm in a coaching session or when I'm teaching the thinking environment, interrupting would feel so strange that I would never do it. Because again, going back to that the coaching spectrum, what I'm doing when I'm coaching is trying to get the other person to think. So what I think really doesn't matter, and it's really not needed. Which brings us on to the second component, which is equality. Again, equality is a word that is in general use, but in a thinking environment, the definition of it is treating each other as thinking peers. And I always go back to when you're coaching somebody, who is the expert in the room? And often as a coach, it's hard because within the contract, you're being paid for your expertise. So often when I train coaches, they're like, well, this is really hard, Sophie, because I go into these interactions and they want me to be the expert and they want me to give them my ideas and they want me to give information, which I agree with and I understand. But I guess what we're trying to do is train people and support them to understand that actually they are absolutely the person in the room who is best equipped to deal with any challenge or question or problem that they're facing. Because as much information as they can provide you as the coach, giving you background information and how they're feeling and what they think about it, they're never going to be able to give you enough because they know so much more than we do. And so what we're trying to do here is really provide that environment that says, actually, I do think that you're the expert and I will treat you in that way. So one of the underlying principles to all of this work is that we don't infantilize people. And what I mean by infantilizing is we don't treat people like children. We don't even treat children like children. You know, a 6-year-old is an expert at being a 6-year-old. That's not to say we haven't got a lot of experience that we can share with them and we want to teach them. But when someone comes to us for advice and for coaching, what we want to do is not undermine their sense of themselves and their feeling around being an equal in this. Again, not saying it's easy, because often in a coaching contract, the client will try and make you the expert in the room. But again, we always come back to, if my first thought is they're going to be the person who, if I can provide the right environment and the right attention, they'll actually start recognizing that they're the expert. The other part of equality is about giving equal turns and attention. So it's incredibly hard to provide generative attention for an hour and a half or a 2-hour coaching session. So it's about you as the coach actually being able to say when your attention's being broken or when you can no longer provide that, and what you need as the coach within that as well. But it's about providing equal turns and equal attention for yourself and for the person you're with. And obviously within this, and really important for coaches, it's about keeping agreements and boundaries. So whether that's about confidentiality or around providing information into that relationship. And it's also about being really clear about your boundaries as a coach and when you would refer something and about where our level of expertise does actually stop. I often think in coaching there's a very fine line between coaching and counselling and therapy, and I know in the UK there's a group of people that are actually really exploring that, because often somebody might come and start talking about a work issue and all of a sudden they're talking about a childhood trauma, and where then do you within that, how can you still keep those boundaries around what you're comfortable with. So it's really around creating that environment where there's two of you who are both providing expertise and both providing that environment, and being really clear about what it is we provide. So I've got a lot of experience in leadership and in training people, but I don't have the expertise that the person who's coming to me for coaching has, because I'm not them. So again, what I ask people with equality to think about is, we sort of all say we believe in it, but do we? Do we really treat people as equals in our organisations and in our work? Do we treat, does the MD get treated the same way as the person on reception? Do we treat, do we treat people as if they are capable of thinking for themselves and contributing? And when I ask this in organisations, everyone puts their hands up and says, "Oh yeah, of course we believe in it." And then I ask them if they, know the names and the backgrounds of all the people in their team equally, and those hands really quickly go down, because often what they do is that they'll, find one or two people that they know really well, and then other people that they would never come into contact with and don't, they'll walk past them every day. And again, critically important if what you're trying to do is get people to think for themselves, because if you don't think they're capable of thinking for themselves, they won't be. Okay, so I think that's what I'll say about quality. The third component I'm going to talk you through is ease, and I love ease. I love talking about it, I love teaching it, and I think that's because they say we teach what we most need to learn. I worked for 12 years in a very corporate environment, so a fast-moving corporate environment, and I was the absolute opposite of ease. I used to walk fast and talk fast and run from one meeting to the next, and if anyone had asked me if I was at ease, I think I would have laughed at them. Within a thinking environment, though, what we need to do is provide a sense of ease for somebody, because that sense of urgency or stress absolutely destroys independent thinking. So if you're with somebody, or you sit in meetings and you're asked to come up with an idea, and you've got people looking at you, or it's like, well, whenever anyone says to me, well, what do you think about that? And you get put on the spot. I find my brain just closes down. I'm actually quite introverted in how I work. So what I need to do is go away, think about something, internalize it, maybe get some more information, and then I can provide what my freshest thoughts are. So that sort of, got to do it now, really quickly, is my idea of absolute hell. And again, from a brain perspective, we don't work well, our brains don't work well when we feel under pressure. So this manifests for different people in different ways. So for me, when I feel stressed, I have that sort of internal kind of burning feeling in my chest, and I get red in the face, and I start talking really quickly. And in terms of thinking well, that kind of goes out the window. I just am doing. So I'm very sort of just get on with the task. And this isn't where good thinking happens. So when we're coaching in a thinking environment, what we're trying to offer is a space and a place where there is a freedom from that internal rush. And that's not to say that the world isn't busy and it isn't chaotic and it isn't overwhelming. Of course it is. That is the environment we're in at the moment. If you can't, we're constantly connected through some kind of medium. People expect an immediate response to things. But it's how do we, even within all of that frantic chaos, sort of find that sense of inner ease. And for me, I see that now as kind of a place of inner stillness. So the world is manic, but how can I, even within that, create an environment for other people where just for that moment they can sort of breathe and relax, and so their brain can relax and go, actually, what do I think, really? And I genuinely am interested. The other thing with ease is about, often I think as coaches or as leaders, we feel that we have to be doing something. We have to be providing advice. We have to give input. We need to, show that we, are worth the money, and we need to, do something. But often, when it comes to people helping themselves and thinking for themselves, sometimes doing means and looks like not doing. And often coaches will say to me, well, it's great, Soph, but how do, I'm just sort of sitting there providing attention. I feel like I need to contribute. And I suppose what we're finding is people do pay and value your attention and the non-interruption and the ease and that sense of equality. That is what people need. But because I guess the exchange thinking world is so dominant, we almost have to remove that little voice in our head that's saying, well, I've got to do something here. Actually, you are doing something by providing this level of ease, by providing this level of attention, by being able to suspend your own internal dialogue and not provide information. That's what you're providing. Because if you can do that, and if they can come up with their own solutions, they're far more likely to actually implement them. The other thing with ease is about being really comfortable as a coach that actually you might not have all the answers, and you've got no idea where they're going to go in their thinking, and that's okay. They might ask you questions that you've got no idea about. I think a lot of my stress when I was in a sort of senior leadership role is that I felt that I had to be the expert. What if questions came up that I couldn't answer and I was on the spot? And it's like, oh, really? There is so little that we all can actually know about a topic. But sometimes it's about just being comfortable with that, and knowing that not answering, not providing is actually what that person needs. I did put information in. So this is the last component I'm going to talk about in this section. I've put within the slide presentation, I've put details about all of the other 10, so I've just hidden them, but I'm assuming you're going to get a copy of this. So each of the other components is in there for you. But I wanted to include information because this is the one that most comes up when I train coaches. In that, as coaches, we generally will have quite a big toolkit of things we can provide. So information we can provide, different models, different suggestions, different questions. And it's how do you provide information? How do you provide that and still stay within a thinking environment, or stay within that, I guess, fully independent thinking end of the spectrum? So again, this has got two distinct definitions. The first of which is about supplying facts, and the second is about dismantling denial. So the distinction I make when I talk about supplying facts is that facts and opinion are two very different things. So if what you're doing is providing your opinion, that's not information. That's just your opinion. And whilst your opinion might be fabulous and valid and incredibly useful, it's still your opinion. So unless it's been asked for, it's going to derail someone else's independent thinking, because what we're doing is putting in our thoughts, so they're going to start responding to those. So I'm not saying your opinion isn't valid. It is. It's just in a thinking environment when what you're trying to do is encourage independent thinking for somebody else, you only want to provide that when you're absolutely sure the other person has completely finished and exhausted their own thinking, and when it's been requested. So I would never provide my opinion unless it's been asked for. But there is a place in the thinking environment for providing information when you've got factual information that would help somebody else think for themselves. So say, for example, somebody's trying to think through, let me think, an issue about a budget, and they're trying to work out how they can do something, and their budget is, they think they've got 10,000 euros to do something with this budget. But actually you as the coach know that that budget's just been slashed and they've actually only got 1,000 euros. So them continuing to think based on having 10,000 is sort of, that's not useful, because they're kind of wasting their time. So if you could say, actually, you haven't got 10,000, you've got 1,000, that's going to materially affect what they're going to think about. So there is a time for providing that and saying, actually, I've got this information, can I provide it with you? Now what do you think? So that's the first part. And the second thing is about dismantling denial. So denial is one of those things that's really interesting, because when you're in denial, you can't see it. And so we can go on with our thinking quite merrily when the rest of the world can see that we're in denial about something. And I'm sure we've all got friends or people that you're coaching who, whether it's about a relationship or a job, and they just keep, I guess, banging their head against the same wall and thinking something's going to change. So there absolutely, as a coach and as a leader, is an opportunity to help people see this. And I've got two questions which I would ask myself and people regularly. The first of those is what we call the Amy question, but it's what do you know now about something that you're going to find out in 6 to 12 months. So it could be, what do you know now that you're going to find out about your boss, about your husband, about your health, that you're going to find out in 6 to 12 months. I use this all the time with organisations if they're trying to do any kind of change initiative, or if they're going into a big period of growth. So it's like, well, what do we know now about the sales result that we're going to find out in the next 6 months or in 6 months' time? And it just forces you to look at sort of what's there. You know, what do you know now about your own personal health that you're going to find out in 5 years' time? What do you know now about your relationship with your sister, your husband, your wife, that you're going to find out in 2 years' time? And it just forces you to look at that. The other question I regularly ask is, what's staring me in the face that I'm refusing to look at? And again, that can just be a general question, or it can be about something specific. So if you're working with a client, and you could say to them, well, what's staring you in the face about your promotion, about getting this promotion, that you're refusing to look at? And all of a sudden it just opens up your thinking to what's possible, or what actually is out there. So that's their sort of two useful questions about denial. So just refreshing, just that distinction between what's factual and what's your opinion. And again, I have to pull myself up on this all the time because I've generally got an opinion on most things. But just asking myself, it's like, well, is this useful? Has it been asked for? Is it my opinion? And am I saying this because I want to do something or show expertise, or is it really that I'm trying to get the other person to think really well for themselves? If I can't answer that honestly, then I just shut up because it's not about then information. So they're all of the components that I'm going to go through today. And again, I'm going to pause and just see if there are any questions. So what I'll do is we're going to unmute the microphones again. If you have a question, that would be great if you'd like to ask something, or if you'd like to type something. And otherwise, we'll pause and then go on. But yeah, so we're just going to unmute. So did anyone have, I guess, a question or an observation on anything that I've said so far? Can everyone see each other's comments? So is that for Tina? Maybe
yeah, for Tina, yeah, that's
for
me.
Tina. Could you maybe just give me one of your million?
Yeah. I think it's the most common question that you get. Unless you offer them some kind of solution, they feel that they're not buying a service, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So how much time would you give to a coachee before you start, in inverted commas, pressing him to do his own thinking?
It's a great question, Bettina, and I'm lucky in that I will only contract to coach people who want to do their own thinking. So I'm very clear up front, and it's definitely not something that you can kind of just spring on people. So you go into your next coaching session and say, right, now what we want to do is move you to independent thinking, because they will be really used to exchange thinking. So if you do that, all of a sudden it's like, well, hold on a sec. So what I suggest is just trying over a few sessions is just moving them down that spectrum. So when they say to you, okay, so what do you think? Just say, actually, well, would you mind just having maybe 5 more minutes to think through that yourself first? So get them to give you a question and say, if I just asked you that question, could you just try for a few more minutes, what are your thoughts? And then I will provide input. And then the next time, maybe they can go for 3 minutes of more thinking. And it's that expectation of that's, they're going to get a better outcome if they can think for themselves. And often what I will do is, with a new coaching client, I will say, the first 10 minutes of this session, what I want you to do is just think for yourself. So I'm not going to interrupt you. You don't need to explain all the components. Just say, I'm just not going to interrupt you. I'm going to ask you what you think, what you feel, what you want to talk about. I'm going to give you that sort of 10 or 15 minutes. Then I'm going to come in with a question or a suggestion. And again, what I'm always trying to do is give them the baton back as quickly as possible. But yeah, it's definitely something you need to, I guess, train them in. Because most of us, you get to 30, 40, 50 years of age and you've actually never had to do your own thinking, so it can be quite confronting.
Yeah, sure.
Does that help? So I would say start small.
It helps a lot. Yeah. It gives me lots of food for thought, actually. Thanks.
That's okay. Anyone else? Is it Nietzsche? Was there something in particular about attention?
Hi, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, I can.
I'm wondering, when it comes to when you're talking about attention and how you're meant to give, full attention to the other person, where does acknowledging information come in? For example, someone says something and then you go, Is that considered a distraction? Will that derail the person's attention if you go, okay, or tell me more, or that kind of comments?
Yeah, it's really interesting, because what you want to do is be sort of natural and yourself, so whatever would be appropriate for you. But what we often do is, by providing that sort of nodding yes, what we're actually saying to the other person is keep thinking along those lines. So they would sort of subconsciously interpret that as oh, okay, I'm doing good thinking, it's getting approval, so I'll keep thinking that. But actually what they might have been about to do is say, oh my God, that was all rubbish. You know, what I really want to do is this. And so it's kind of a balance between making sure that they know that you're there and you're with them and that you are responding to the content, but not doing something just because you feel like you need to be doing something.
Right, okay.
So it's not about, you know, when I first started doing this, I was very impassive. You know, I would literally have a very neutral face. But what I would urge all of you to do tonight or whenever you next go to the bathroom is put on your I'm incredibly interested in you face. Like, you're fascinating, I think you're amazing, I think you can think through this yourself. Put that face on and look at yourself in the mirror and think about, would you keep thinking in the presence of that face? And it doesn't matter if you wouldn't, because often what we do is we wear our questions on our face. So we will frown, or we look confused, or we look amused, and then that's what the other person responds to. Because again, our brains are so clever and so quick, they will pick up on those non-verbal cues of approval, of love, of trust, of respect, far quicker than any of your words.
Right.
So it's just being aware of, is my face providing that, I guess, you know, respect and attention, or is it providing approval?
Right.
And often what I say to people is, it doesn't matter if your face isn't reflecting that, just sort of rub it off and keep practicing. So it's not about being impassive, it's just about, I guess, being aware of, are you doing it to be seen to do something? Is it distracting the thinking of the other person? If the answer is no, do whatever you like.
Okay, thank you.
Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Were there any other questions? Elizabeth? No. You're struggling with that. Elizabeth, do you want to talk to me, or do you want me to just try and respond to that? Okay. So the Amy question. So what I mean by that is, it's a way of asking yourself. So for myself now, so I've just moved back to Sheffield. So when I'm sort of setting up my business, I will sort of say to myself, well, what do I know now that I'm going to find out this time next year? And so what I know now is that sitting in my office isn't going to get me clients. What I know now is that building a new network is going to be hard. What I know now is that working for myself is very different than working with groups of other people. So literally, it doesn't change anything. It just means I can put those things on the table and go, okay, well, am I going to do anything about that? So again, it could be about your health. So what do I know now that I'm going to find out in 2 years' time? If I don't prioritize stretching and yoga, I'm not going to be able to run, because I'm kind of getting to that age where things don't bounce back as quickly. So I can keep doing what I'm doing, but at least once I've verbalized it and I've said it, I'm more aware of it. And again, I would say with this, just try it, Elizabeth, with something that is real for you. So whether it's a relationship, a job, and you can do it by writing, so by journaling, and just say, you know, something that's actually challenging you at the moment. What do I know now about this challenging issue that I'm going to find out in a year? And just see what comes up for you. And it might be nothing, in which case don't worry about it. You know, you can always use the, you know, what's staring me in the face about this, that I'm refusing to look at question. But it's just one way of sort of forcing you to look at what maybe we don't want to look at. Does that help? Let me see. Does that help? I'll see. Okay. I'm going to go that that's okay. Any other questions just before I move on? No? Okay, so we might mute and carry on. And I'm unmuted. Okay. So what I want to do in this last little section is really try and focus in on, I guess, what I thought would be most useful for you as coaches, and how you can use it. So I'm going to just talk briefly around how I coach using a thinking environment. I'm then going to give you, I guess, my 3 tips, which are very incredibly simple, but hopefully they're things you can use straight away. And then I think that's me done. Let me just check. And then we'll open for questions. So when I'm coaching in a thinking environment, I suppose I do have the luxury of people come to me because this is what they want. So they know I work very much at that end of the spectrum, that they're not going to be interrupted, that yes, I will provide information, but only when it's asked for. So the first thing is about, I guess, trying to encourage and have a conversation with the people you're coaching. The best thing they can do is come up with solutions themselves. I used to work with small children, so I was trained as a primary school teacher, and from an incredibly early age, we don't like being told what to do. You see this in kids. Even if it's right, even if it's the best thing for us, we don't like being told. And the reason we don't like being told what to do is in our brains, we see that as a threat. So we see being told as a threat, even though it might not be. So even though it's for our own good, when that goes into our little amygdala, which is a very old bit of our brain, it interprets that as somebody else is saying they know better than us, and that we're not equal, and therefore I'm going to react against it. We might then come round to thinking that the other person knew best, but we'll do that on our own terms. So we don't like being told what to do, even when it's right. So I will often have that conversation with someone and say, even if I give you the best solution ever that will make your work better, your life better, your relationship better, the chances of you actually implementing that and doing something with it are so much lower than if you could come up with that yourself. So I will have that conversation with people, and I will say, you know, over however number of sessions we've got, what I'd love us to do is at least start moving you towards that, so you start developing that skill around that. And that's not to say I don't have expertise, and it's not to say that I am not an incredibly effective leader. It's just I'm not going to be the best person to solve their problems. So I've sort of put up here some questions that will always be in the back of my head when I'm coaching, and I've put them up there, so I won't read through them. But what I'm always trying to do is, is what I'm going to do, so is what I'm going to say, is the intervention I'm going to give, is the information I'm going to provide, is that going to help them think for themselves, or is it because I feel like I need to do something, or because I haven't had a conversation with them about what my expertise as a coach is, or am I responding to their needs? And again, I'm not saying this is easy, because I think often people come to us as coaches because they want someone to tell them what to do, and that's okay. But even if I do provide information, I will then straight away ask, so what do you think about that? My first question in any coaching session is, what would you like to think about, and what are your thoughts? The reason I ask that is because it's the biggest, most open question I can think of without direction. So even if they've said and contracted to come and talk about a work thing, I will provide at least the first 5 or 10 minutes of any coaching call as, what would you like to think about, and what are your thoughts? I will then say, if appropriate, I'm not going to interrupt you for the next 5 or 10 minutes, so why don't you just use that space to think about whatever. I would then, as a follow-up question, ask them something along the lines of, what do you want to achieve in this session? So again, what do you want to achieve? Once they've given me that, I'll then ask them. So again, sounds really simple, but say I want to think about I want to think about getting a promotion. Okay, so what are your thoughts about getting a promotion? And again, that's where your expertise comes in around, what is it they're assuming that's stopping them, what's the environment, what are the organizational structures, sort of all those kinds of questions, but again, really flicking it back to them as quickly as possible. And over time, helping them move along that spectrum of independence. I always talk people through that. And I always talk them through the fact that most coaching interventions are ineffective over the long term because the expertise comes from the coach, not from the client. You know, and just try and, you know, give them information about that spectrum and about independent thinking, so that they can, you know, try and start expecting that within your sessions. So again, I've provided a few questions. I've just got sort of 3 tips that I thought, you know, God, if you could take away nothing else from this call, what else could you, you know, what would I say I always do? The first is absolutely don't interrupt people. So get really, really comfortable with silence. And in your coaching, get really, really comfortable that you will never interrupt, and let people finish their sentences. And be, I guess, aware of that sort of internal dialogue for yourself about when you want to interrupt. And again, I don't know you individually, and you might all be brilliant at not interrupting. I just know for myself that was probably the thing that really started to make a difference in my leadership, in my relationships. And it's the one thing I think that's probably more than anything has changed my relationships with other people, because people know that I won't interrupt them ever, and that allows them to be at ease. The second thing was about practicing generative attention. I provided you with a little bit of information about that. There is more information I guess I could provide you, or there's books you can read about it. But just get really interested in the other person. How do I do this? I do it by keeping my eyes on their eyes when they're talking, and being genuinely fascinated in them as thinkers. Being genuinely interested in them, because that sort of energy that I can give someone else is what they will, that's what they'll respond to. So when I talk about it, that's really what I mean. It's about sitting back, settling in, keeping your eyes on their eyes, if that's appropriate in your culture, and being fascinated and joyous about their ability to think for themselves, because you will exude that in your being, and people know when they're feeling rushed. They know when you want them to hurry, and what they also will know is they'll respond to that quality of attention as much as they'll respond to any words or information that you could give them. And that was my third point, which was start trying not to provide information too early. So again, I'm not saying don't ever provide information. Just get really, really used to not providing it until it's been asked for. So even when someone comes to me and says, Sophie, I want your advice on X, I will ask them, sorry, what exactly is it you want my advice on? So what's the question? What is it you want my opinion on? And then instead of answering that, I straight away will ask them that question. So I'll say, okay, you want my opinion on your improving your communication skills. How do you think you can improve them first? And only after they've completely exhausted that will I provide information. And it's amazing, like even when I say that, it sounds so simple, and it's so effective. And what's joyous is people give you this question that they want you to answer. You ask them, and then they think you're brilliant because you've asked them this fabulous. They're like, oh, that's a good question, and they'll start thinking again. So really try not to interrupt. Get really good at providing generative attention, and try not to offer information too early or uninvited. So that's sort of all of the information I'm going to provide you with today. I've put on here, Nancy Klein's written a couple of books, Time to Think and More Time to Think, and they were written in that order. Both of those are available on Amazon, I believe. I personally, if you're going to buy one, I would start with Time to Think. It's half the price of More Time to Think, and it also provides really clear information about the components. So I think that's probably the best place to start. More Time to Think has, I guess, it was written 10 years later, so it's got sort of a few more nuances around the processes and how we use this with groups and how we've used it in organisations. But if you were only going to buy one, I would start with Time to Think. It's half the price, and I think it would be a really good place. I've got a website which you can have a look at. I don't go into a huge amount of detail about the thinking environment on there, but I'm more than happy if there's something that I've sort of said today that you go, oh, that'd be interesting. I'd like a bit more information. Just drop me an email, and I can see if I can either provide that information on email, or I might be able to provide you with some other information around those components. And I think you're going to get this presentation, and I've also in there given you each information on each of the other 6 components, but obviously you don't get my commentary, but it will give you, I guess an overview. So that's all I've got. So we're going to unmute you. If there are any questions, if you wanted to type those in, or if there's anything you wanted to say. The only thing I'll just ask is if you're not asking a question, if you could just mute your microphone so we don't all get the background noise. And we'll just pause and see if there's any questions. It's okay.
Ποιος θα το κάνει, ο διαχειριστής, μια τριμερής επιτροπή, ένα συμβούλιο. Ποιος ας βρει τον τρόπο να το κάνουν οι δύο υπουργοί. Ο κύριος τον Άσο δεν διατάσσονται.
So that question, they remain silent. Yeah. So there's a question from, I'm going to get this wrong, Iman Luidu. No, it's Maria. It's Maria, isn't it? That's the surname. Okay, so remain silent even if they look you straight in the eyes and ask what you think about it. No. So if they are literally saying, come on, Sophie or Maria, I really just want to know what you think about it, then answer that question. Because again, we're not infantilizing them. We don't want to treat them like children. If what they're saying is what I would most value in this session is your opinion and your input, and I really want to know what you think, answer them, because that's what they've asked for. It's just when it's not that explicitly clear. Does that help? Emma. Fear. How do you move them forward? Oh, it's a lovely question, Maria. Can people hear me? Yeah. So how do we move our clients forward when they're gripped with fear? I think the first one I would say is I would acknowledge that I think coaching, mentoring, therapy, counselling, all of those are very, very interrelated. I don't know many issues that when we're really challenged by them don't go back to some deep-rooted feeling or thinking about ourselves as individuals. So I think it's very, very hard to separate those. So I would say cautiously and carefully and with permission would be my answer. And again, with the thinking environment, there is a huge amount of safety because we're leaving it up to the client to dictate where we go. So when they're gripped with fear, what do I do? I think I acknowledge that fear. So I think how I deal with that is by acknowledging that it's in the room and seeing if somehow we can work with that. Because when fear is a primary emotion, so it's one of those ones that really goes down to our core neurological pathway. So when we're gripped by fear, we can't actually think well. What we can do is think about how to get rid of that fear. So I think what I do is acknowledge that we seem to be in a place where that sort of primary emotion is there, and then ask permission about what would be the best way to go forward. What I wouldn't do is ignore it, because we're much more feeling creatures than we are thinking creatures. So I can rationalize that fear, but what I actually possibly need to do is really feel it and acknowledge it, and then I can start thinking about it. So I make sure that, it's acknowledged, that maybe we can cautiously have a look at it, but I definitely don't just carry on, even though if it's in the room. Does that help? Thank you. Well, if there's no other questions, I guess I'm going to close. It's quite late for you. But before I do, I would love to just appreciate you. I would do an appreciation, which is one of the components with you each individually, which I can't do because I'm not sort of with you. But I would, one, I really appreciate you giving your time and your energy and your attention in this call. I've really appreciated the questions and the interactions that I have had. And I've really appreciated the opportunity to connect with you, even if it is virtually. So thank you. And yes, hopefully our paths will cross at some point, even if that's just via email. So thank you.
Yes. Can everybody hear me now? Yeah. Hello. Hi, everybody. This is Marina. Can you please be so kind in SurveyMonkey there, just giving us your feedback of this webinar? Can everybody see the link of SurveyMonkey? Can you all click on the link to see if it's working properly, please?